You're live. All right, we're live, and I'm off camera, so I need to figure this out, I guess, kind of. Let's do this, and I will sneak in over here, I think. Anyway, hi everybody. I apologize. Hangouts on air is no more, so we're figuring out our streaming situation, but we were just in the room chatting about Black Hat last week, and yeah, there was a lot of good stuff. It's very specifically related to, are you testing our stream? Is it working? All right, look at that. We have a stream. We don't know how to get people not in this room in the stream, but we'll figure that out next time. Oh, God, I gotta get in the picture a little bit. Yeah, this year, that's right. There was actually, outside of any presentations or people talking about how to break into things, there were a number of really cool things. I don't know if I'm pronouncing her name correctly, Natalie Silvanovich from Google, Project Zero. She had a series of blog posts about 6 months ago where she talked about these 0 days in iOS in iMessage, and she talked about that at Black Hat, and that was really interesting research. But I think the big news out of Black Hat was 4 years ago was the first time Apple ever presented at almost any outside conference in like a very formal, this is Apple presenting fashion. And they talked about security in iOS, and they didn't come back the next few years. And this year they came back. So Apple gave a presentation talking more about the security of Apple devices, the T2 chip, which is kind of funny because they went on basically right before two people from Duo Security went on talking about their research into the T2 chip. And the good news was nothing that Apple said made them panic and change their and then change their presentation. But Apple also, surprisingly to a lot of people, said that next year they will start offering developer-fused devices to sort of hack on and test security properties of iOS devices. They'll come with SSH-enabled shells. Like, I thought that was pretty incredible. And Apple also said they're going to have a bug bounty program, like an official bounty program.
That's a big change.
It's a big change for Apple. It is. Like, yeah, they might be behind the times a little bit, but it's a big change for them. It's a big step. So, and the bug bounty program includes bounties for bugs found in pre-release OSs, so beta OSs. And I think that will help them, move to a more secure stance when they're able to release. I don't know. Any reaction to those things? Like, I thought it was cool news.
I think the bug bounty program will be big. I mean, not that they'll give away millions of dollars, but just that it will really fundamentally improve the security of the whole stack.
Yeah, and for people that don't follow the security industry, like, there is this whole sort of like underground black market of people selling 0 days, right? So there's a financial incentive to, if you find like a serious vulnerability, particularly in iOS, you might go sell it off for $1 million to someone on the black market rather than reporting it to Apple. So Apple sort of changing that financial dynamic will hopefully have, the right effect, where people will report it to Apple instead of selling it to some, sort of shady 0-day dealer who will then potentially go sell it to, a nation state or some other actor looking to, spy on dissidents or things like that. So
American citizens.
Or American citizens. Which, I don't know, is really interesting. So that was some interesting news. But that's not what we planned on talking about today. I think, Victor, you probably have the most up-to-date information. Like, I'm interested to hear from you. Like, I've taken my finger off the pulse a little bit on the Mac administration side. Like, I'm no longer like the person responsible for rolling out a new OS and testing it and all those things. I'm trying to stay up to date as much as possible, and of course, I talk to the people at Duo where I am, and I'm on the beta program. What have you found in terms of testing, and what is it going to look like to deploy a 1015 machine compared to what people are used to now? What are the biggest changes, or headaches, or whatever you care to talk about?
It's a funny conversation because I jumped on the betas very early. And
yeah, I mean, I think let's be clear. I think this has been and you tell me if you agree, but I think this has been a rougher beta cycle than in the past.
They did respond to feedback pretty quickly. So the first 2 or 3 releases, they were doing them like weekly, and the first 2 or 3 releases, I had stuff to scream about. Like the first release, they broke security keys. And I was like, hold on, is this actually expected, or it's broken? And they very quickly were like, no, this is broken. But like I couldn't move past that in our workflow because we depend on security keys a lot. And after that, they broke a number of times actually. And this is very relevant to people who are doing system administration as test T2 machines. Like we have this habit of like, I have my T2 machine that I work on, and then I have a bunch of old devices that are sitting around, and those are my test devices where I test my VM. And Apple probably has the same thing with their QA. I don't know, but it seems like they keep slipping bugs into that. They keep slipping bugs that only affect T2 machines. And it's very painful. And so I found the one where DP enrollment just completely broke for T2 machines.
But everything else
during one of these beta releases, and it took me a while to even get somebody's attention. And once I did, they were very interested in this and like fix the bug. But Apple's been doing a lot of. There's actually a lot of interesting things if you end up digging deep into the T2 changes. Like the reason they broke is because they added some sort of remote attestation for their activation flow.
Oh, right.
So you actually get a cert that has the serial of the machine and of the T2 chip embedded in it, and that happens during the DP activation process. So a lot of it is really interesting. If you're testing these betas, make sure to test it both on old and new hardware.
Yeah, it maybe on a different scale, but like I remember when there were Intel-based machines and PowerPC was still supported, there were just these subtle differences sometimes in the build, and you'd see like, why is that happening? Oh, this affects the Intel machines only, So it's an interesting thing when you have this same OS, but like on the different hardware, it has these different properties. But any big headaches? Like if you went to a conference right now and you're sitting around talking with a bunch of other Mac administrators and they haven't tested this at all, you would say, watch out for, or you need to know about.
Yes and no. So the biggest thing that I expect to be a headache is the transition from kernel extensions to system extensions. And just like kernel extensions, system extensions have a new profile that allows you to whitelist them via an MDM. Of course, no vendor has released a system extension that you could trial with right now.
Well, they haven't had that long to change
We're
over.
probably going to have a demo version of Santa soon that is signed and you can test it. But on the Apple side, Apple
but to be clear, kernel
program.
extensions are still going to run.
They're still going to run, but you got to restart the machine after the initial. I think after the first time you install a kernel extension, you have to restart the machine. After they publish an update to it, you don't really have to. So it mostly will keep working. But but this transition link is something you have to watch out for. And if you're handing out devices directly to end users, and you are installing a critical security thing, like you might want to add a restart in that process and so on.
Yeah.
So.
So in your Monkey or Jamf or whatever script that goes into your deployment solution, put in a restart. To restart condition.
There's a lot of really good stuff, like the fact that they added a Kerberos extension and they added all the single sign-on stuff that I'm very much looking forward to, but haven't had a lot of time to test this because it's also something that, like, they say it's there, but it's not quite actually there, and so.
So I don't think that's something I've followed. What single sign-on?
So Apple had this, the name slips. Apple used to have this thing that their service team sold to people, the Enterprise Connect.
Yes, and
yes. So,
wasn't that just for
they
Active
Sherlocked
Directory?
it for themselves. So they did it by adding something called single sign-on extensions. And so if you are a IDP, like Okta or OneLogin or Google or Microsoft, you can implement an extension that apps can use to sign on to that provider. So
got it.
So and it ships, like, there's one per system, and you have to the IDP itself has to provide the plugin because you have to prove that you own the domain. So there's some sort of.
And will that change the workflow of authenticating to these identity providers, or will it still just be sort of like a web view pop-up?
It'll allow you to integrate internal apps internal workflows into it. So like if you have a menu bar plugin, then you say, or like you're using Google Cloud and you have Kubernetes or something, you'd be allowed to integrate all of that to say that, this utility on the machine can talk to your BeyondCorp resources because you have this single sign-on extension that can talk to Google Cloud. So that stuff is cool. And the other really cool bit about it is that Apple built a Kerberos extension that they are shipping with the OS. So what used to be behind Jamf Connect and Enterprise Connect and all these products is now the OS, and you just have to configure it. So that part is really neat.
Yeah, that's cool. Does that expose through a UI, or is that just all some text file?
There's a configuration profile for it.
Oh, yeah.
But I haven't had a chance to play much with it.
Well, that's good news.
Yeah.
That's interesting. What else in Catalina? Any big MDM changes for the better or for worse, I guess?
There's a few. There's one that I'm really excited about, and that's they're calling it enrollment customization. So before, there used to be this problem that if you knew a serial number, you could just enroll into the MDM. And there was nothing that the MDM could do to pre-check. They could, for the other workflows, like for a workflow where you go to a web page and you download the enrollment profile, you can add a login prompt there and whatever. But for shipping a device directly to a user that's DP configured, they go directly to Setup Assistant. And if you prompted for credentials, the only thing you could do was basic or digest auth, and that didn't work for anybody.
No.
So what I did now is that they added a Safari web view. So in your DEP configuration, the MDM vendor has to support this, but you can specify a URL that will be rendered in that web view.
Nice.
And there you can add anything. You can add a acceptable user policy. You can have multiple pages, and so you can have a whole workflow for enrollment, and it supports security keys because the latest version of Safari does.
Yep.
And you can do a lot of neat stuff there, and you just have to end that flow, you have to serve the enrollment profile. So you could have a unique profile per device, and you can do all sorts of stuff that you can do with web resources. And I haven't seen vendors advertise it yet, but I've seen users get very excited about it. And so I'm interested to see what that looks like. But
yeah, now that's exciting. That's a good change. That's 10.15.
It's a big deal.
Only.
10.15 only, yeah.
So or starting with 10.15 as far as we know. That's
and it works for iOS and for macOS.
That's interesting.
And sort of the really, really big change for MDM is BYOD. So Apple added something called user enrollment with.
Is this the thing that started with iOS? Like they did something with iOS, like where users could enroll, but it hadn't been brought to macOS yet.
It started with iOS specifically for education.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So this was the federated Mac. All the names slip me. They made the Manage Apple ID. So you as a employer have, are syncing your credentials across different directories and so on. And so you can, right now they support Azure ID, expect other things to come federated with Apple Business Manager. But once you have these federated managed Apple IDs for your employees, your employee can bring a device and choose the user enrollment option, which is very different from what we have today with any enrollment option, because it does not allow the MDM to see any personally identifiable information from the device.
Yeah.
So not even the ID of the device, every enrollment is unique. And you could see, it's very interesting how they chose to display that, because you could query the device for the battery level, let's say, but you can't query the device for anything else. Like you can't get the serial number, you can't get anything about the user of the device. If you're querying for, let's say, installed certificates, it'll only show you the certificates that the MDM itself installed for that enrollment. And it creates a separate volume, so you can push apps that you need for enterprise. And that's actually, they did a very interesting thing there as well, because let's say I have Slack installed already. I have to choose to delete that Slack in order to get a managed Slack. They're not allowing side-by-side things. So, but if you go into the App Store, you will see something called Slack for EMM.
Yes,
and
that's right.
It's a slightly different icon, and they support it, so you can push these for EMM versions of apps that they exist.
Yeah. Oh, that's exciting. And so I self-enroll. And I have my own device. I say, no, I don't want a work device and a personal device. I'm going to enroll myself. You pointed out one of the big caveats is that there's less information the system administrator can get from my device, which is interesting. I know that's one of Apple's tenets for quite some time around this, right? Like if it's not a supervised device that a company owns, some system administrator shouldn't be able to see what apps I have installed on my device, or a lot of other personal information. Have you heard if I enroll my device and now I lose it, can it be wiped?
The device can't through disenrollment, but
that's interesting.
The enrollment, you can wipe just that volume.
Yes, which wipes any of those apps.
And it really depends on your point of view here. But if you're sending a remote wipe command, the device has to be online and get it, right? So you can send unenroll command, which will remove this.
Do the same thing,
and it should do the same thing, but leave the device alone. And then the user has the ability to wipe the device themselves through Find My Device and so on.
See, I think that's a really good compromise, because there are a few things that I have access to corporate resource-wise that don't require any MDM. I'm okay, I'm fine with that. As soon as my company says you need to enroll in a full MDM for this, I go, nope, I will I will just rather not have access to it, because as an end user, like, it's my device. I don't want you to have the ability to wipe it, or, like, we've heard of cases where, like, oh, this company mistakenly sent out a wipe command to a series of devices. Like, no, I just don't want you having that ability. So to me, that's a really interesting compromise. And I haven't been paying close enough attention to the chat, but someone on chat in the Hangout did ask, I want to know how activation lock is going to work. And that's actually a good question. But I think you kind of summed it up, that at least in this case, my device will have my Apple ID on it. It can be it'll have activation lock, but I can still enroll it, self-enroll it.
So the activation lock is actually, it's specifically for MDMs, it specifically applies to supervised devices. So
right,
Apple's
that's what I'm saying. It won't conflict with my personal.
Right. So you have to choose how you want to enroll, right? So if you bring a personal device, you control the wipe and all that through Find My Device, and you give your employer the volume that they manage, and they only have access to that volume. Now, you as an employer can choose to not allow the type of enrollment, or only allow it for specific devices.
Right.
And for everything else, you can have supervised enrollments, which are DP only from the very beginning.
Right.
And there you can control activation lock. And the activation lock is something that came to macOS just now.
Only on T2 machines, right?
Only on T2 machines. I've been waiting to test it, and the backends for it actually haven't been activated on Apple servers. So I can send the activation lock request, and I get device not supported. And from what I hear, it'll be turned on sometime very soon. But
interesting.
Still haven't been able to test it end to end. There is something to watch out though for, is that the user can enable it. And if you're in a country that doesn't have DP, like, you can't really control it. Apple did add, there's something called MDM options that you can control during enrollment, and you can choose to disallow the user from enabling it. So they're adding those controls for MDM, and it's kind of a workaround, but we'll have to see how the different vendors implement it.
Sounds like a good direction overall, though, and like I said, I could allow only one type of enrollment, or I could certainly see, in a zero trust world, if you're going to do the user enroll, you might not have access to the same resources that someone who's supervised and goes through that whole process. Like, I think there are a lot of interesting options there. It's kind of funny discussing this a little bit, because we talk about DMP enrollments and all these options, and fitting it into zero trust and beyond corp, and I still talk to a lot of companies that are just sort of like still trying to understand why they need second factor, and why things, just because they have a firewall, like why you might not consider that the most secure setup. So it's really funny, like this huge sort of gap in perception around different companies in, like, what does security look like. And I actually even went to dinner with some friends, a group of us, and there were two people there, and I don't even know how it came up, but one person mentioned, like, because I was telling a story that my sister-in-law had put her phone down and left it unlocked, and I saw it lit up, and and I kind of touched the screen so it wouldn't go to sleep, and I was considering, like, I'm gonna send some messages as her, just as a joke, and I eventually decided against it. So I told that story, and one of the people at the table said, like, I don't even lock my phone. And like, that's one of those, like, reactions, like, how do you even respond to that? Like, do you get email on your phone? Oh yeah. I'm like, and you don't lock, like it's the most basic thing, but like people see security as such friction that like even something as simple as locking the, and they had relatively modern phones. They could have done Touch ID or Face ID or whatever, but just I don't lock my phone. And it was the like it's like there's this pause of shock.
It's funny with the iPad having Face ID now.
Oh yeah.
Like I had to disable the preview for messages because it's always unlocked. Like I'm looking at it, so it's always unlocked. And
even in my
you can
iPhone,
walk by and you can read my messages. And,
right. But
so,
even my iPhone, sometimes I find like I take it out of my pocket and like I don't even want it to unlock, and it's still kind of like I'm not making a really like a gesture to say like, yes, I want to unlock. It's still like at this weird angle, sort of very down low. And every now and then you look down and you see the lock and you go, that's almost too good.
Yeah.
You know, like there are many cases where it's like, I don't want you to unlock. Like I want to be very explicit about, this is a gesture of me saying, I want you to unlock now.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, I really find that offering only the face unlock it's just so many areas where that's a bad choice. And my number one is driving. Like,
yeah, I agree. That's
being able to unlock with a
if
fingerprint.
You have CarPlay there.
Yeah.
You shouldn't be touching your phone.
Yes, you shouldn't be touching your phone, but I agree. There have been cases where like even just using voice, like I do leave Siri off at the lock screen. So what I used to do is if I had my phone out somewhere, I could exactly do that. I could just put my thumb on Touch ID, have it unlocked, and then I'm still looking and just go back to driving and say, hey Siri, text, my kid, whatever. Hey, text her, I'm going to be arriving in 5 minutes or whatever.
For me, I think you just texted your kid.
Probably.
But I think for me, it's the scenario where I'm in a rental car, doesn't have CarPlay. I don't have I don't have a stand for my phone.
Exactly.
I'm doing navigation, but the screen is turned off for some reason. And it's just like, I can't get the map back without having an accident.
Yeah.
And I used to be able to just touch it, and I was back where I was. And it also doesn't work sideways. I also have a clip on my old car.
I
held it like this, and I could not unlock the phone.
Right, you can't unlock the phone in that case.
Just seems
dumb. I don't know. It
seems dumb.
It kind of does,
Seems
but
dumb.
Overall, I've been pretty happy with Face ID.
I mean, it worked. But the other problem for me is that I'm very nearsighted, and Face ID does not work at the distance I keep the phone from my face.
Well,
I hold the phone. This is where I read my phone, and I have to do this every time I want to unlock it. I'm old because I'm old.
So what would be your suggestion there then? Face ID and Touch ID?
I honestly don't see why Face ID is an improvement over Touch ID. It's cooler. It's definitely cooler. Totally get it's cooler. I don't see how it's actually.
It's more secure.
It's more secure.
Okay.
Suppose.
But couldn't we make Touch ID more secure somehow? Like instead of swapping in a face, couldn't we make Touch ID more secure?
Possibly.
I honestly believe Apple moved to that because it's cooler. And it's more secure because they've invested millions and millions of dollars in making it more secure. Like, Touch ID is really all I need.
Touch ID is good, but it doesn't have a dot projector.
Exactly.
No, I agree with you only in the case of like what I was just talking about, is that sometimes Face ID is too good. It's like I don't want my phone unlocked right now, and it's unlocking at all these oddball angles.
I mean, this is one of those arguments where like there's these two great things that are really cool and work really well, and I'm just saying which one I like better. Like I'm not saying Face ID is bad. It's great. It's fantastic.
Yeah, I could see. I mean, okay, let me get this out of the way. I can't see Apple moving back to Touch ID.
Of course not.
But if that was an option, like right now they got rid of buttons on the home screen, which is, and you have this nice big screen, which yes, I know Android users, you've had this for quite some time, but now Apple's moved to that model. They're not going to junk up their glass.
I had a beautiful giant rectangular Android phone with
Touch ID on the back.
And that was actually fantastic.
Yeah, I agree.
Much better than Touch ID in the front because that's where your finger is.
Yeah, you're kind of picking it up and it's right there under the. Actually, I don't remember who I pointed that out to recently, but I pointed that out to someone. Like I said, why aren't you using, fingerprint? And they said, I don't know. Does this phone have it? And it's sort of like there inconspicuously under the camera on, I guess it was the Galaxy S9 or something. I'm like, yeah, I'm sure it does, right? And like he went into settings and set it up.
There's
Yeah.
one phone where it's on the side and you just like have to run like
Huh.
it does like a moving thing, which is supposed to be. I was like, that's too complicated.
Yeah.
So Toshiba something.
But yeah, the MDM changes sound really intriguing. I'm happy to see that, and I think across the board, you know, whether it's Face ID or whatever, like we're getting stronger security properties out of things. But again, I think explaining that to people and some companies it's a challenge. It's a chore, and you know, it has to be done in a way that you know people from not only like the IT people but the finance people and like all these people sort of like get it. Um, you know, Duo has had a number of blog posts, and something that we're looking at very closely is WebAuthn for passwordless authentication. I know Google has recently had some posts on that and has kind of talked about it. One of the people on my team is on the W3C working group for WebAuthn, and I think Christian Brand from Google is in that same group, so they end up chatting quite a bit. But like that's I don't know, that only has upside to me, where you know you tell your IT administrator like, guess what, you won't need to reset a bunch of passwords anymore, right? And it has these really strong phishing properties. And then you know you tell the finance people that like one of the biggest costs, you know, for your help desk is resetting passwords. Well, guess what? Like that's going to go away. But again, it's like I don't know if it's bleeding edge technology, but it's definitely leading edge technology, and getting people there can sometimes be really, really difficult.
It's hard. Like it seems like today, just judging by my social circle outside of tech,
Yeah.
like people have kind of migrated to password managers, and that was a long journey.
Yeah.
And I'm the only one who's walking around with a security key, and
Yes, right.
That looks very foreign to people. And explaining to them that you actually need two, and you know you need to keep one in the safe and one you use, and all that. Like it's a very difficult. Like security keys are really cool, but
absolutely.
Yeah.
But I think explaining that and getting people to use like non-tech people, that's a real journey. And like I'm almost surprised you got people to use Fun.
I think at this point it's sort of propagated through our culture that I see even some older people have those. It kind of there's like the equivalent of like you have a notepad or a bunch of post-its, and this is a better model for it. So that's kind of easier to translate. But yeah, security keys, I'm interested to see where they go.
Yeah,
like how they work outside of the tech company.
Yeah, definitely. Again, if we get there, because WebAuthn basically is the successor to U2F, so you can do WebAuthn protected by biometrics on your device as a second factor or as a primary factor, which is really cool. And it has some nice anti-phishing properties, which are that you're binding your keys to a particular site. So when something comes along with a lookalike domain, your phone's not going to your device is not going to hand off the keys to that lookalike site because it's smarter than you, or it's like it's better than you as a human reading this URL.
Yeah.
So
it's really nice, but like I run it with all of these things now. I run into the challenge of, and this might be just a personal thing, but I wipe my devices very often, and I forget to do the backups for those things.
Yes.
And like re-enrolling into those things, especially where like I have a TOTP or security keys or something on like 3 different devices, and by chance I wiped all of them on the same day. You know, it's like that's the one thing I keep forgetting. Yeah, it's always a problem, but it might not be a problem for most people. Like this is uniquely because I keep testing these things, and every device I have is a test device one way or another. So
After the Chrome password manager is really nice for people who don't know what they're doing.
Yeah, that's true.
Like it just works really well. Like it can make up a password for you and just save it right away.
Yeah.
You know, you never really have to do anything smart.
Yeah, and what's nice about the Chrome password manager is that it's cross-platform. So I was going to say, very similar, like Apple's built-in, into Keychain, the password
that's true
manager. Now it pops up on a site if you're in Safari, and it says like, "Hey, do you want me to come up with a strong password for you? And do you want me to save this?" That's great, but it's Mac and iOS only. So
yeah, so this might be a iOS 13 feature, but I was able to set 1Password as my primary password manager in some setting, and so Safari and everything else
It works in 12.
Uses 1Password for everything, even though it does those native features.
Interesting.
It always offers me both 1Password and.
That's what happens with me, but I haven't seen a setting just to say like, look, just use 1Password. I think you're right though.
Maybe you're right.
I think it's iOS 13.
Yeah, it might just be
some
more
set.
seamless.
But
I've been
very happy with it. Even just offering me 1Password.
Yes, agreed.
It works really well. And then Face ID for 1Password.
Yes, I was just gonna say that's where Face ID is really nice. Where I'm kind of like already looking at my device and like it switches to 1Password, unlocks, gives me the thing.
And that's where I have to go.
Yeah.
Like that. And I feel like, cool.
Got it. So what I'm hearing you say overall is Catalina, go for it.
I'm more worried about the things that are going to happen after Catalina. Like Catalina is kind of painful. There's a lot of small changes that you got to watch out. Like lots of things broke because of the read-only system volume and the firm links and all that. And they are fixing those things. Like every beta has gotten better to the point where like I have almost nothing to complain about.
Yeah.
But we did have to patch a few of our tools in order to support those things as well. But some of the conversations we've been having with Apple in the community at conferences and so on is they want to disable local profile installation. So many, especially larger organizations, have had this workflow where they're using something like Chef or Ansible, and they're generating a profile locally and installing it. And so all these profiles are templated in some way and dynamic, and they're unique per user and so on. And some of them change hour to hour because they're so dynamic because there's some
They use the profile command to
and for security reasons, Apple wants to disallow local profile installation because
it's very powerful.
And some things will install. Although, like, I don't understand how they'll disable CF preferences totally, but they're moving in that direction. So that means that a lot of us have to think of how does this work with MDM, and unfortunately, most MDM products out there don't really have an API where you can say, here's a profile, I built it, install it for me. And when they do, they have like weird rate limits and things like that. And in a world where you don't control the entire stack, like it's a very difficult transit. Like let's say you're using Chef and you're very into it, and you've got all your automation in there, and it's doing a lot for you, and then you have an MDM vendor, pick one of the top 5 or whatever, and you're going to say that you're going to generate 10,000 profiles an hour and install them across your entire fleet. You're going to run into some limitations, and Apple is giving us sort of, well, they haven't officially said how long until we have to move to this, but they're sort of put the goalpost, and it's like, this is where we're going. So, come with us in that direction and tell us, where it breaks. So
my biggest fear in that is also that, like you're saying, like, here's the goal of generating 10,000 profiles. I'm always worried that Apple's attitude is nobody has 10,000 machines, right? You need 1,000 profiles, and there'll be 20% of them will be like
They
there'll
don't
be
look the
5
same.
different profiles.
Yeah.
We each go to 200 machines. It'll be fine. And MDM vendors are notoriously bad at scaling, and
Yeah.
they really. My fear is that they're just going to design everything around the idea of, you'll have 24 profiles. It'll be fine. And
Yeah.
like there's lots of installations where you should have 10,000 profiles or 100,000 profiles because everyone's different.
The one thing I do kind of like about that is not about MDMs being difficult to scale, but you have to. So a lot of us have had really good tools to query some system API and get some value, but most of us still have very bad inventory systems, and like that's really important for zero trust networks and things like that. Having a very well-defined state of the host at this time, or like in an hour ago or whatever, with some latency. And this, for like, if you want custom profiles around your devices or something, you gotta not just ship the generation somewhere server side, but you also have to start collecting this data into some inventory system. So that's something that people should be doing anyway. So I feel like it's a good direction overall. Like people will gain a lot by knowing like across their entire fleet what each serial number is, belongs to what primary user, and so on. And
absolutely. Like, sort of tying that back into my comment earlier, just getting people to a second factor. Certainly as I go around to conferences and I mention, zero trust networking or beyond core, I guess I lived it for so long that I'm always surprised when people say like, no, I've never heard of that. Like, tell me more about that. Like, it's interesting. And you go, really, you've never heard of this? And there's definitely a disparity between the U.S. and outside the U.S. The adoption outside the U.S. I find is even like much lower. Like,
oh, really?
Yeah. Like when in Europe, or last year when I was at Sydney Mac conference, Xworld. People I speak to in Europe and at the Sydney conference last year was just like, no, I've never heard of that. Like, well, Google published a bunch of papers on this.
They solved all the security problems with the cookie thing.
Yeah.
So they don't need anything else.
But I think that is the big lift, though, when you start describing zero trust networking or beyond corp to people, is that like there's a lot of infrastructure associated with it. Has to be correct. That's a big lift for people, but particularly around inventory. So many people, like, their inventory is just a disaster.
It's hard. It's a hard problem.
It's a hard problem.
Seems like the easiest problem in the world because, like, you buy something, we get it, but it's really a hard problem.
It's a really hard problem. I mean, sort of one way to solve it is you put an inventory system in and then just cut off anyone who's not in that inventory system, and they will come to you. And like, it puts a little strain on your help desk or something for a little bit, but at some point it gets correct.
If your big fear isn't that there's stuff in your inventory system that you don't own.
Of course.
Because that's much harder.
Yeah.
That's what makes it hard.
Yeah. I mean, depending on the size of your organization, one way to do it is burn everything down and start from scratch in terms of inventory. Cool. Well, I know we've been at this for a bit. I don't want to hold people up too much longer. We mentioned conferences all the time. We mentioned conferences before. Did anyone go to Penn State?
No? Someone from the team did.
Okay. If someone
they liked it a lot. They had
if someone
really
could speak
good things to say about it
directly to it, it's always a good event. It's always really good. I'm disappointed I missed it this year. I don't think I actually had a conflict, but I think I just had enough travel around that time that I didn't want to be away from home yet another week. But it's always a good event. I think Xworld, speaking of Xworld, just happened. We have MacSysmin coming up. I don't know if anyone's attending. You're attending?
I'm going, yeah.
Good. I will see you there again.
I love going out.
Yes, that's this.
You meet a whole different bunch of people.
This is going to be my 10th year there, I think, and I'm really, really looking forward to it, as always. And then MacTech. MacTech is coming up. I just had a conversation with Neil the other day about sessions and things, and getting excited about that. So Mac sysadmin first week in October, and Mac Tech is the 16th, 17th, 18th of October.
October.
October, a little earlier this year.